Okay, so yesterday we talked a lot about primaries and how elections work. Today we're going to switch gears a little bit into voting tendencies, voter turnout, what causes voter turnout, or what prohibits voter turnout, things like that. Grab up here. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh.
She didn't like the cold pill.
So, voting in the United States. So, turnout for voting. Voter turnout is a difficult thing to calculate. Number one, because we have a lot of voters who are eligible voters but aren't considered actual voters. People who are prohibited from being able to vote for certain things, maybe socioeconomic. They can't get to a voting site. They aren't educated enough to understand what they're doing. Maybe they speak a different language, and so it's very difficult for them to understand our ballot. Things like that. We also know that there are a great deal of people in our society who could technically be eligible voters, but we don't allow them. So if you have a felony on your record, if you're a convicted felon, you're not able to vote for the rest of the time that that felony is on your record, which is usually for life. So even if you served your sentence and you are, everyday citizen, you still aren't eligible to vote. All of the prison population is not eligible to vote. And there are a lot of controversies there because people sort of, what's the lesson in that? Are we saying that if you mess up and make a mistake that you're not really able to have a voice in our government? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? It'll depend on who you talk to, but historically we've only seen about a 50% voting population actually vote. And this means that races tend to be very close. We only have about half the population actually going to the polls to vote. You have a lot of really tight races, especially in some specific states. What's interesting about this is that we often hear people complain about the government system, but they don't go and vote. And that's one of those big mysteries in the world of political science. What causes you to be able to sit, and talk about it, but not get up and go and vote? Is it this idea that you don't feel like your vote counts? Is it the idea that you don't feel like voting does anything? Are you simply just there for the social aspect of talking about politics, but you don't actually want to get involved? It's one of those things that we, those X factors that we can't really figure out in the world of political science. Some believe, as far as the effect of low voter turnout, some believe that apathy or cynicism leads to low voter turnout. So the constant frustration with the way that our government works sometimes leads to low voter turnout. Sometimes this idea of I just don't care that much about it leads to low voter turnout. It's interesting, we see that people do that a lot, but then they also tend to sound like they care when they're talking to other people or when they share their opinion. Is voter turnout declining? Yes, it is declining. We have seen in my generation, your generation, what we consider the low, obviously 18 to 25. We've seen this age group get more politically active, but not go and vote as often. It's still a very low voter turnout age group. And a lot of that just comes down from the fact that for our generation, the idea of going to a voting booth, taking time out of your day to go do that, is not something that our generation tends to make a priority. That being said, there has been a lot of discussion about potentially changing the way that we vote in this country to sort of appeal to the younger generation of voters who may or may not be physically cool with going to a voting ballot. Yeah. We also see voter turnout declining simply because of this frustration in politics, this gridlock. It's causing more and more people not to want to just, participate in it at all. So this kind of shows you a little bit about voter turnout for presidential and congressional elections. Congressional elections are what we call midterm elections. They happen 2 years into a president's term. And this is, again, all of the House of Representatives and a third of the Senate. You're always going to see congressional elections have a lower voter turnout. It's just not, it's not popular. It's important, but it's often not the thing most people go and vote for. Presidential elections are obviously going to get a higher turnout because people know it's really highly publicized, things like that. But as you can see, it's kind of ebbing and flowing a little bit, but we have sort of stayed right between that 50-60% as far as voter turnout. So it's important to sort of understand, what that tendency is doing to sort of see what will happen, especially in the next election. There are a number of factors that influence who votes and how you vote. We've talked a lot about this, especially when we talked about political socialization and the things that you do in different geographic locations and things like that. So a little bit of this is a review, but remember that rather than focusing on how you vote, this is more focusing on who votes. So in regards to age, Americans who have the highest turnout rates are reaching retirement age. We see that retired citizens tend to be the highest voting population. They don't know what to do. They feel like voting is really important. Government is involved in their lives on a daily basis through Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all sorts of other things. And so they tend to see it as a very important aspect of their civic duty. Educational attainment, in general, the more education you have, the more likely you are to vote. Again, we know that you are on the candidates, the more likely you are to vote. And so the more education you have, just in general, tends to lead to more people who are interested in sort of getting educated on the candidates as well. As far as minority status, we see minorities tend not to vote as often as the majority white Caucasian male. And that's simply because they feel like their voice isn't going to be heard anyway, and so they just tend not to come out and vote. However, one of the major groups of people that we really, that candidates really try to achieve as far as a voting population is that minority status. They're sort of the hidden vote. If you can get a minority group to feel motivated enough to go to the polls, that's a very large voice that could add to your kind of electoral votes. And so it's one of those, they don't vote very much, but we want them to vote. Income level, we see that those with a higher income level tend to come out and vote a little bit more. Sometimes that's simply pragmatic. They have a car, they can get to a voting ballot. They know where their voting location is. They work a nice job that gives them time to go, during their lunch break and go vote. It's very important. It's sort of a societal thing. All of their coworkers are going to go vote, so they're going to go vote. If you have a lower income level, you might not have a car to get there. You might not even know what's happening because you don't have cable or you don't have a newspaper or you don't, follow those things. Maybe you don't work a job that lets you go during your work day. Maybe you work at night and you're sleeping during the day and you can't go to your voting box. So we tend to see income level become a little bit of a factor there. And then two-party competition. The more competitive states tend to have a higher turnout. States where it's more of a battleground, we tend to see more voter turnout because it's up for grabs. For states that are traditionally one party, we tend not to see a huge voter turnout, especially because the other party tends to feel like their vote won't count. It's just going to be thrown away anyway because of the electoral college system, winner take all, and so they tend not to come out and vote at all. Okay, so this is voting in the 2012 presidential election by age group. Again, you'll see the lowest is that 18 to 24, 18 to 25 range. You see the highest 65 to 74, so a lot of retired, again, because government is really important to them. It's a time in their life for government can make some big changes for their life. This is voting by educational level. So obviously you see the higher your education is, an advanced degree, you've got an 81% voting population rate. Okay, let's talk about why people don't vote. And again, this is something that some political scientists spend their entire careers studying. Why do people not go and vote? It's free, it's painless, it's essentially a very easy way to get your voice out there. Why do people still not do that? There are a few reasons that we've sort of been able to pinpoint. First is uninformative media coverage and negative campaigning. We know that when you are bombarded with a bunch of media coverage about all of the candidates and all of their different things, it can get confusing. And rather than take the time to go and figure out what each candidate actually stands for, lots of people just throw their hands up and say, I'm just not going to vote. I don't know, I'm super confused, I don't understand who I should vote for. There's a lot of mixed messages. You know, people say, well, you said this, and that candidate says, no, I didn't. And who do you believe? That negative campaigning can get really old. For a lot of people, that turns them off to candidates or even the entire presidential election. If they just feel like all they've ever heard are the bad things about candidates, sometimes they just tend not to vote. The rational ignorance effect is a huge reason. This is produced when people purposely or rationally decide not to become informed on an issue because they believe that their vote on the issue is not likely to be a deciding one. So a lack of incentive to seek the necessary information to cast an intelligent vote. It's this idea of basically, I don't really feel like I will matter in the world of voting, in the world of this issue, and so I'm just not going to take the time to go learn about it, figure it out. I'm just not going to vote at all. It's sort of this idea that when it comes to voting, people want it to be easy. We know that people, the average American citizen, does not spend very much time at all doing any research on the candidates or the issues. Part of that's because you never learned how to do it. Well, you guys are learning how to do it because I'm making it my personal goal. But a lot of your parents never learned how to do that. I never learned how to do that when I was in school. It's not glamorous, it's not exciting, it takes time, and sometimes it can be slightly confusing. So we see a lot of that. So as far as some remedies for some of these things, we have seen some proposals for plans to improve voting turnout. Some of these plans have been to allow voters to visit polls up to 3 weeks before the election. You should know this, especially when you go to college or if you leave home or if you work a job that doesn't let you go to the polls. You can always absentee ballot. It's a pretty easy process where you sign up. A lot of counties will let you do that online. They'll send you a ballot in the mail, you mark your ballot, and you send it back. And it allows you to vote not on that voting day, ahead of the voting day, and kind of get it over with, and then you don't need to go anywhere. But one of the things that people have kind of proposed is, why don't we open these polling centers for about 3 weeks and let people come whenever they are convenient, as opposed to just one day in November when you may or may not have time to go and do that. Some people want you to be able to absentee ballot without giving a reason. When you absentee ballot, you have to fill out this form, and it asks you, why are you absentee balloting? I absentee balloted once because technically I was in college, and so I was a resident of my home district still, because I'm not really like a resident at a college. And so I was voting in an election at home, and so I absentee balloted. That works. If you're gonna be out of the country, if you're traveling, if you're, whatever. But if you didn't have to give a reason, I think we'd see a lot more of those. And then the third, this is my favorite one, is to declare Election Day a national holiday. Therefore forcing workplaces to have a day off. Schools would have the day off, large companies would have the day off, all federal employees would have the day off, other than people who work in voting areas. It would allow for that reason of like, oh, I have to go to work, I can't do that, to sort of become null and void. It also elevates the importance of voting. Right now, our election day is a pretty normal day. Most people don't really notice any different. And I think if we kind of stopped everyday work and made it pretty important, I think it would become important. There have been proposals to do technology to allow you to vote online. The problem with that is that it's not secure. We really don't have a system that could be secure enough to make that relevant. We know that people would try and skew the voting systems and change the coding and all that jazz. So that's kind of one of those tougher things to accomplish. Legal restrictions on voting. So what are some of the historical restrictions that we've seen throughout US history? The first is a property requirement. The writers of the Constitution allowed states to decide who should vote, thus forcing really women to not be able to vote, although the state of Wyoming in 1870 did allow women to vote. Also, for a good period of time, in order to vote right after the framers drafted the Constitution, you had to own some property. And so that was sort of a requirement there. Further extensions of the franchise, the 15th Amendment in 1870, the voting age was reduced to 18 in 1971. We've obviously allowed women to vote with the 19th Amendment. There are a lot of things that we've tried to do to open up that voting restriction. Citizens can all vote, all races, genders, religions can all vote. But this leads to the question of, is the franchise still too restrictive? There are certain classes who don't have the right to vote. Non-citizens don't have the right to vote. Convicted felons who have been released from prison, current prison inmates, and the mentally incompetent are all not able to vote. And there's a good amount of controversy over each of those groups of people as far as having some voting rights or say. And I think that'll always be a discussion as far as what will we allow in this country and what will we not allow. Okay, some current eligibility and registration requirements. This is super important to you all because I would imagine by the time, will any of you be 18 by next November? Okay, cool.
But what if you're already 18?
Yeah.
Well,
You raise your
right,
hand.
then you're gonna be good to go. So when you go, which you should all go, please make sure you go and vote next November for the presidential election. There may be a new
Primaries in April. Primaries in April.
Thank you, Martin.
Primaries in April.
When you go and vote, there may be some new restrictions. Well, I guess it won't be new to you, it'll be new to me. Because we have, the state of Wisconsin has made a couple of different laws between this last presidential election on voter requirements. So first and foremost, you have to register to vote. Please understand you have to register to vote before you can go and vote. It depends on the state that you live in. Some states, I think like North Dakota does not make you register at all, you can just show up and vote, but all the other states have you register. And they'll differ by when you can register. In the state of Wisconsin, you can register there at the voting place. Some will require you to register ahead of time. Some have you registered already, like if you get a driver's license. I think you have to get a new driver's license when you turn 18, right? No?
No.
19?
I didn't have to get a new driver's
Like,
license.
yeah, it's in your next.
Okay.
Like right now, you're provisional.
So I think when you do this new one, it like automatically registers you as a voter. There's something with that. So sometimes it'll be done for you. Always just double check. In the state of Wisconsin, they typically send you like a little postcard that says, have you registered? And then they give you this website and you check it and it'll tell you if you're registered or not. If you move, you have to register. I have to re-register because I now live in a different voting district. So there's a lot of things there that you have to kind of be aware of. Where am I here?
So if you're a college student, then do you
Yes.
have to do an absence, like if you're going like out of state?
No.
Or how do you?
So you can actually register and vote in the district that you currently reside in college. So like lots of colleges will do this as kind of a big group thing. So like if you go to UW-Madison, because of this voter ID, they're giving out free, you go and you can get your student ID that allows you to vote, and they have voting centers and places that you can vote while you're on campus. They make it pretty easy. Like I went to Edgewood and they sent all of our names and they were all automatically registered at our place, and we just went and you could vote. So typically you just have to kind of inquire just to make sure that everything's all set up. Okay, what am I looking at here? Photo ID laws. So this is a big deal. This has changed in Wisconsin. So before, in most states, the requirement is that you have to be 18 years old, you have to be a citizen, and you have to show residency in the place where you are voting. For me, well, before, you just had to show mail. You had to bring a piece of mail that you'd received in the last 2 weeks that showed your name and your address. That was it. Now you have to have a identification, some sort of identification, formal identification, that places you in the area that you're looking at. This is a kind of a controversial law. There are a lot of states that have done voter ID laws, so we're not the first state, we probably won't be the last state. But one of the things here is that they sort of feel like maybe this is too restrictive. That someone who can't go get a voter or a photo ID, college students, it kind of limit, they have to go and get that ID typically. Does that lead a restriction? Because that means that you have to go do things before you can go and vote. And so are we sort of discriminating against groups of people? The Wisconsin photo ID law has been in appeals courts for about the last year or so. The latest ruling is that it is legal. And so as of right now, you will need a photo ID in order to vote. Extension of the Voting Rights Act in 2006. The Voting Rights Act was renewed. It has to be renewed every like 50 years or something like that, just to continue to make things current. It's kind of a controversy every time it comes up because people feel like we should add more to it, and the government has sort of just been renewing it in its entirety. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about primary elections, what they look like, some of the differences. Every state has a primary election. What's our specific date, Martin? Do you know the
It's
specific
like
date?
April 4th or something.
April 4th.
Pretty sure.
Okay. Maybe all 18-year-olds will go and vote. Well, I can't vote here, so maybe we won't. So each state does their primary just a little bit different. They get to decide how they want to run their election. The purpose of this primary election is to choose the candidate who will become the party's nominee for the general election. Some states use a caucus system, which is not up on this slide. The caucus system is CAUCUS, and it's basically a meeting of party members designed to select the candidate and propose policies. It's sort of this group of people that come together, they sort of meet, they talk about who they'd like to select, and that's how they vote in that situation. Not a lot of states do the caucus system anymore. It's pretty time consuming. It causes people to have to like meet all at one place in one designated time, and it's kind of inconvenient. So lots of states do the primary system. So we have first what's called the closed primary. This is where a voter is limited to choosing candidates of the party of which he or she is a member. So in a closed primary system, you would go and they'd ask you which party ballot you would like. You would pick that party ballot and then you'd go and vote. It doesn't allow for a lot of, split line voting or kind of voting for one party and then voting for another party. It's very close, it's very restrictive. On the flip side of that is the open primary, and this is where any registered voter can vote, but they must vote for candidates for only one party. So you don't have to be like affiliated with a party. You can just walk in and get a ballot. So it's sort of a little bit more open, but it also sort of limits you to voting by partisan. You sort of vote on the ticket line. A blanket primary is where the voter can vote for candidates of more than one primary. So this is just generally like you get a ballot with all of the candidates and then you just go and vote for whoever you want to vote for. And then a runoff primary is a two primary system. So you'd have an initial primary, and then you take those people who have the highest voting outcome, and then you do another primary to select that. All of them come with pros and cons. Lots of states just tailor it to be what they think their state will need or what fits them best. Elections in the United States are held on the first Tuesday of November, unless that's the first day of the month, and then they go to the next Tuesday. So always the same. Okay, how are into how elections are conducted? There's a lot of controversy in how elections are conducted. We have what we call the office block and the party column ballot. The office block is also called the Massachusetts ballot, and this is a form of a general election ballot in which candidates for elective office are grouped together under the title of each office. It emphasizes voting for the office and the individual candidate rather than the party. So it will say president, and then it will give you the Republican, the Democrat, the independent, third party, all of the candidates under the office, and then it'll say vice president. I'll give you all of those things. Some people really like this because it sort of organizes the names. Some people really don't like it because it can lead to a little bit of confusion if you're voting on the party line, because you have to go through each one and find the party candidate. So there are also what we call party column ballots. Now, you won't have both to choose from. Each state decides how they want to use their ballots. In the party column ballot, they're all grouped by party, and then it'll say like name and the office that they're running for. It emphasizes voting for the party rather than for the office or individual. This can lead to what we call the coattail effect, which is the influence of a popular candidate will have more success in the same party. So in a party column, typically, if the party is doing well, all of those people in that party tend to kind of ride the coattails of those influential people and move on. Voter fraud, this is a huge deal. It was a huge deal a number of years ago. There are a lot of dangers in voter fraud from the voter and from the people who run the election offices, or the mistakes by the voting officials. There are a lot of different ballots. Every state you go to, the ballot looks a little bit different. And so we kind of ran into a problem in the presidential election of 2000. The ballot in Florida is really what we're talking about here. And in that ballot, it was a butterfly ballot, so it opened, and people, there was like a box and a line and a box and a line, and people, when you quickly looked at it, it looked like you could check the box at the end of the name, and you'd be voting for that person, but essentially it was the box ahead of the name, and people got confused and started voting for people that they didn't want to be voting for. The second issue here was that they had a punch ballot system. So what would happen is you would put your ballot into a machine, you would select the people that you wanted, and it would punch your ballot. So there'd be little holes. The problem with that is that some of them didn't punch them all the way through, and so the ballot counting machine wasn't counting them. Some of them were punching it in the wrong location. When you punched the wrong one, you had to go get your ballot like shredded and go get a new one. And so it led to Florida being a very tight election within like 200 votes. And so there was a Supreme Court case that came out to try and have Florida do an entirely new election because they didn't even know if the ballots that had been cast were official, if they were correct, if they were being counted. There was a huge kind of controversy. For your systems, unless they change the ballot, I think I've showed you this before. This is how your ballot will look if you go and vote in Wisconsin, or it has in the last 4 elections that I voted in. There are names and there are arrows like this. And for you to vote for someone, you have to fill in the arrow with your pencil. Okay, so you don't check a box, you don't like bubble a box, you complete the arrows. Part of that is because, again, they're trying to avoid the you should be filling in the arrow that's pointing to the name you want to be voting for. In the bubble system, if the ballot is written in a specific way, it may be confusing as to which bubble you fill in for specific people. And then you fill it all out and you put it into a machine and it sucks it in and it counts it and you're good to go. It's really important when you vote to be serious about it. Don't play around. It's considered a government place. Like, I don't know where your voting situation will be, but like I voted in elementary schools and in the High B on the east side and all sorts of different places, but it is considered a government area when it becomes a voting place. So you have to go in and you have to be pretty, like, don't be silly. They take it very seriously. It's a very big deal because if they mess things up, they can technically be sued for voter fraud and for kind of messing things up. So it's a pretty important thing to do. And I think you should all do it. I think it's really important. Obviously, I would because this is what I do every day. Oh, the state of Oregon uses a mail ballot. So they actually have these, they look like post office boxes. They're set up and this is where you deposit your ballot. So they send all of the ballots out and then people can drop them off in like a certain week time. Some people think this is a really great idea, some people don't. I don't know, it just shows you that each state is really different. If you move to a different state, one of the things you really need to do is make sure you know how your state's gonna run that voting situation. Okay, last piece is the Electoral College. And we've talked about the Electoral College many times in the first semester of this course. So I'm not gonna spend a great deal of time on it. You should spend some time to get to know it. But essentially, electors are a member of the Electoral College, and they select the president and vice president. Remember that when you go to vote, the people you vote for on your ballot, it's not actually going straight to them. It's going to your electors. Your electors are deciding who they are going to vote for based on who you voted for. So in the state of Wisconsin, if the majority of people vote for one candidate, those electors all go to that candidate. They all vote for that candidate. And their votes actually go to the candidate. There is a total number of 538 electors or electoral votes in the Electoral College system. Wisconsin has 10 of those. We're kind of in the middle of the road as far as states with the number of electoral votes. States like California have a huge amount of electoral votes, Texas, big states. It's based on your House of Representatives members plus your 2 senators. And so when a candidate wins Wisconsin, they get 10 electoral votes to the number that they need. There are a lot of criticisms to the Electoral College. Like we talked about when we talked about third parties, it really limits third parties. It limits people from that popular vote situation. We've seen a number of presidential elections where someone has won the popular vote, but ended up losing the Electoral College system because what they ended up doing is losing states that are higher in numbers. So that's kind of what you're looking at. So there are a number of criticisms in that system. This is kind of a map to show you a little bit. It's really small. A candidate needs to get to 270. 270 is like the magic number in presidential campaigns. It's all they're thinking about. I guarantee you it's all that they're thinking about right now. There are some really key states that these candidates are really going to try and win. So this is sort of a map based on that Electoral College system. So it looks a little funny, but you'll see states like California, Texas, Florida, New York, Illinois, Ohio. They're big states. They've got a lot of Electoral College numbers, which is funny because geographically they're pretty, they are large, but like states like Montana, Wyoming, they're considered a very small state in the Electoral College system as far as the weight that it holds. This shows you a little bit about what it looked like in 2012 as far as the electoral system. So Wisconsin, the majority of Wisconsin citizens voted for Barack Obama, so all 10 of the electoral votes went to Barack Obama. And again, what you're noticing here is because he won California, Florida, Illinois, which was kind of like in his back pocket already because he's a member of the Illinois, or was a member of the Illinois legislature, New York and Pennsylvania, he's got a lot. Whereas Mitt Romney has a lot of states, but they're not very large. They don't have a lot of electoral votes. His largest is pretty much Texas. And so that's where you really start to struggle a little bit, because you can go ahead and win a lot of the country, but if you don't win the key states, you're not going to be in the Oval Office. Okay, so that is it for this lecture. Let me shut this thing off.
Add 1 bit.